This feels weird.
Very different.
The fact that I've been able to make one of these videos on the original series and then this video now on its sequel series is probably a good indicator that I've been doing this gig for too long. That 90s show hoped to capitalize off the success of another 90s show. That, of course, being That 70s Show. While it seemed like audiences enjoyed this trip down memory lane, that visit wound up being short-lived, as Netflix has canceled the series after just 2 seasons. That were divided into 3 parts for some reason. Truth be told, the sequel series was plagued with problems from the start. The first of which being its name and the legacy that it would have to live up to. Being seen as a successor doesn't always mean being seen as a success. Having the That title meant that eyes were always going to be on the product, but it also meant that those eyes were behind rose-tinted glasses. Critics who were overly critical on the series from the start, all for not being the same as the instant classic. It never got a chance to survive on its own before it was asked to thrive as the second coming of something else. It's an unfortunate situation to be put in. It's unfair to ask a cast to have the same chemistry and capture the same magic as an entirely different cast from several decades past. These were some big shoes to fill, and they were expected to be filled immediately, which they understandably did not. The name association did backfire in other ways as well. There was always going to be this black cloud hanging over the show, and that cloud was actually a clown named Danny Masterson, the actor that played Hyde on That 70s Show. A character that was loved by audiences everywhere, despite the fact that his actor nowadays is hated by everyone pretty much everywhere. And, rightfully so. However, Hyde was integral to that first show, and important to all the characters in it. So fans of the series were always going to question where he was. The part, not the person. The guy who was being played, not the guy playing him. And because of who played that part, that question was never going to be answered. The character is never once mentioned, never once acknowledged, never once referenced, which is somewhat understandable. They probably want to get as far away from that actor and his horrible reputation as possible, reminding audiences about what they loved about the series and not what everybody hates in real life. Though I will still argue that I don't think it's in poor taste to mention a character, even in the event that they're played by a terrible person. Fiction should not be punished by fact, and I think something as simple as saying the character moved elsewhere, or passed away, would have sufficed, but he's far from the only one to not be recognized. The foreman's oldest daughter, Lori, gets a couple name drops throughout the show, but her whereabouts are unknown and mostly undiscussed. And that's another relatively big character to go unmentioned. Of course, this was probably done due to the fact that her actress had passed away, but even in saying that, prior to her actress passing away, the character was recast in the series. So worst case scenario, you could have always got that actress back. Without a doubt, one of the biggest hurdles this show ever had to overcome was its style of acting. So, the show is presented as being a modern-day That 70s Show. Modern day, of course, meaning if it took place in the 90s. But the acting at times felt much more like a daytime Nick trying to impersonate Nick at Night. It was very Disney Channel Goes Wild. Again, this is understandable, if only because the core cast is made up of younger actors. Younger actors that got their starts on shows for a younger demographic, which requires a completely different style of acting. Unfortunately, this style constantly clashed with the tone of the show, and at times, the overall outlook on the series.
You're being an idiot.
Your face is being an idiot.
That doesn't even make sense.
Yeah, it doesn't.
They were like this the whole ride here.
Ready to party? I got the snacks. Nate's got the cake.
And I was like, nope, not this girl. So I went home, bleached my hair over the washing machine, cut up my jeans, and decided that this is my life.
People who only saw the show through the grapevine got the wrong impression. If you only saw a scene or maybe a clip from the series, you may think that they were going in an entirely different direction and completely mishandling the material. And you'd be justified for thinking that. But as someone who sat through the seasons, all 2 of them, I can assure you, the plots did feel ripped straight out of that original show, because at times, they were, verbatim. It really is just the style of acting that felt different, and definitely not for the better. The series started off with an identity crisis, not knowing if it wanted to pay more attention to the returning cast for nostalgia's sake, or nurture a newer fanbase with the newer leads. It aims to do both, but it seems like it really only succeeds at doing one or the other at a time. Sometimes the show would showcase an older character at the expense of a newer one, or a newer character would upstage the original they were asked to work with. And dividing up screen time to old and new was not necessarily the easiest feat. The chemistry between the newer cast could be lacking, to a very distracting degree. Early on, the dynamics were severely underdeveloped. That 90s show didn't know what the relationships between the characters were, or even what the characters themselves were. More often than not, it felt like the newer cast were asked to step in the roles of the previous show. Nate and Nikki are asked to be this generation's Kelso and Jackie, and both Nate and Jay are basically the same character, with each written to be the second coming of Michael. Likewise, Leia is written to be the second coming of her father Eric. There are traces of both Donna and Hyde and Gwen, and Oz kinda is the Fez of the group, if only by the proxy of being different. As opposed to being the new versions of something old, it may have been better if they were all just new characters entirely, and they were allowed to be new characters. At times, it felt like the show's stories went nowhere. Sometimes they'd set things up, but they'd never see them through. Or, alternatively, they just move past them with haste. Like when the first season ends, it ends with Nate and Leia almost kissing, almost cheating on their significant others with their friends. And this is a big deal, because Leia is dating Jay, and Nate is Jay's best friend. Leia is friends with Nate's girlfriend Nikki, and Nate is also the brother of Leia's best friend Gwen. So this was all kinds of wrong. This is a major moment. This is a big deal. Or at least it should have been. The next season sees this be brought back up, only to lead to second-long conflict between Jay and Leia, and a scene-long confrontation between Nate and Nikki. Of course, this did eventually lead to the two breaking up, but that was actually done after they got past this problem. Not sure if this was meant to set something up in the long run, but as is, this just feels like a weird plot pivot that never really went anywhere. Likewise, how about when Fez and Sherry become an item? Now this could have been an episodic pairing, but the first season sees the two get together, break up, and then get back together again, with Fez having a relationship with her family, and even ending his decade-plus long feud with Fenton to help her out. So, it's clear that there were plans for this pairing. But with Wilmer Valderrama unable to commit due to scheduling conflicts, this couple was completely abandoned without any rhyme or reason. Fez doesn't even get referenced the next season, despite playing a pretty important reoccurring role in Season 1. These aren't the only times this happens, but they're definitely the most notable and the most noticeable. The show is also guilty of the one thing that I hate that every reboot series does, and it's not taking time into account, which is troubling for a show called That 90s Show, where it seems like time is very much of the essence. Let me explain. When Kitty visits Fez's salon, they chat, with Fez informing her, and the audience, about what happened between him and Jackie for the first time. When Jay mentions that his father is Michael to Red, Red seems taken back and surprised, and both Red and Kitty seem shocked to see Michael and Jackie back together. And I understand all of this is done to fill in the returning audience, but realistically, shouldn't they have already known all of this? Or at least some of it? What about all the time in between the ending of that 70s show and the beginning of that 90s show? There's a whole decade and a half in between. You mean to tell me that none of these things have ever come up in conversation for over a decade? I mean, maybe this is a nitpick on my part, but I just think that this is a bad trope. There are other ways of conveying information to an audience. You don't have to make the leads just as clueless as everyone else. We can get there some other way. Once again, in my own opinion. There's also times where it seems like the series is pulling from its old lore a little bit too much. Like with Donna and Kitty constantly being at odds with each other. I mean, sure, that was a fixture from that old show, especially the later seasons of that old show, but it seemed like that arc had come to a logical conclusion with the close of the series. Kitty makes amends with Don in the finale. Seeing that get soft retcon just has me like...
Nah. Feels forced.
Now, I know I've said a lot of bad things about the show, I mentioned a lot of issues that it had, and I stand by every single one of them. However, all of the things that I've just mentioned come with a big fat asterisk. Because while these were all problems, they were problems that were being improved upon. In record time, the acting matured. The crew got more comfortable as their characters, and their characters began to feel more natural around each other. They started to share a chemistry as a cast. People that were once underwritten began to become more distinct and identifiable. The story started being less nostalgia-driven and more nostalgia-driving, catering more to the decade than the first show. The dynamics evolved. The older elements of the original series weren't being phased out per se, but they did stop being so heavily focused on. It finally seemed like that 90s show was starting to get on track. It was beginning to live up to the hype, starting to become more fluid, feeling like everything was in sync. And then just like that, the show went bye bye bye. Because just as everything was finally coming together, it all came apart. When Netflix shocked fans and canceled the series after just 2 seemingly successful seasons. I don't know that this series did in fact decline. I mean, I think if anything, it was constantly elevating itself, and it was beginning to emulate the spirit of the source, without the necessity of nostalgic window dressing. That 90s show didn't just die, it was never given a chance to live. As far as I'm concerned, for whatever negatives there were, and there were some, there were twice as many positives. It's hard for me to not look back at this series and wonder what could have been. I know that they're still fighting, they're still trying to get a deal, but truth be told, I don't see this series getting picked back up. But I would sure like to be wrong. Simply put, 2 seasons is too short. With that being said, if you enjoyed this video and would want to see a retrospective on the show that spawned it, let me know in the comment section below by leaving a comment saying,
Back in the 70s or something.
I am vengeance. I am the night, and that was V Infuso. Just remember, if you're not tuning in, then you're missing out.
So, if you like the words that came out of his mouth hole, and you too would like to become a V-generate, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, nerds!
And if you're not joining the fun, you're in for one bad day. And you know what they say about having one bad day?
Catch him next time. Same bad time. Same bad channel.